She stood every day in the back of the classroom, silent still, and never once took her seat. No tantrums, no excuses, just a 6-year-old girl, quietly refusing to sit. No one asked why, until a single dad noticed her, and what her teacher discovered soon after made her reach for the phone and whisper 3 chilling numbers, 111. But what unfolded next was not just a rescue. It was the beginning of something quietly miraculous. If stories of quiet courage and healing grace speak to you, consider subscribing to our channel. We share true heartfelt stories that remind us all kindness still changes lives. Now let me take you back to the very first day he saw her. The wind came early to Elk Ridge that November. It howled low through the pine trees, like a memory trying to speak, carrying with it the faint scent of firewood rust and something colder emptiness. Mark Callahan stood on the concrete steps behind Elk Ridge Elementary, watching the wind scatter a handful of yellow leaves across the back parking lot. It was 6:08 a.m. The sky was still a slate-blue bruise above the mountains, and frost edged the windows of the cafeteria like lacework. Mark adjusted his flannel shirt, rubbed his hands together, and reached for the ring of keys clipped to his belt. He had opened this building every morning, Monday through Friday, for the last 3 years. He had never been late. He had never been early. He had never spoken more than was necessary. To most of Elk Ridge, Mark was the janitor who didn't smile, the one with the limp not pronounced, just a hint, as if his right leg sometimes remembered something the rest of him refused to. A man in his late 40s with graying stubble, a face worn not by age but by retreat. He moved like someone who'd once carried too much and now carried nothing at all. But Mark noticed things. He noticed when the cafeteria dishwasher made a low grinding noise. He noticed when the second-floor hallway started smelling like mildew. And he noticed this particular Monday, a small girl standing perfectly still on the playground. She was wearing a pink coat 1 size too big, the sleeves swallowing her hands. Her shoes were mismatched, one red, one white, and she didn't move, not even when the bell rang. Mark kept his eyes on her a moment longer than he usually would. She stood near the bench under the maple tree, didn't fidget, didn't play, didn't speak. He turned away, went back to his work. Inside the school, the fluorescent lights buzzed to life. Mark moved through the building like a ghost, with a checklist, wiping down surfaces, unlocking supply closets, making sure the heating kicked on in each wing. It was a rhythm, and rhythm was how he survived now. At 7:15, as the first teachers filtered in, Miss Alana Brooks approached him in the hallway. She was in her late 30s, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and a cardigan with small embroidered robins. She taught first grade, and had a voice like warm tea, steady calm, and always gentle with the children. "Morning, Mark," she said. Her voice held a question. Mark gave a small nod. "Morning. Did you notice the girl? The one on the playground?" He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded again. "Pink coat. That's Maddie. She transferred in last week." Alana hesitated, glanced down the hallway toward her classroom. She hasn't sat down once. Not during reading time, not during lunch, not even when she colors. Mark said nothing. I thought maybe she had some sort of sensory issue, or maybe just nerves. But it's not fear, exactly. It's like, sitting isn't allowed. She looked back at him. "You worked with kids before, right?" The air stiffened. "Just wondering," she added quickly. Mark gave a faint shake of his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore." Later that day, while scrubbing graffiti off the boys' bathroom mirror, Mark replayed the image of the girl in his mind. Standing there, motionless, shoes unmatched, shoulders slightly hunched like someone trying to make herself smaller than the world around her. He didn't want to think about Denver, about the last case, about the one he hadn't saved. He had come here to forget not to see her ghost in a different pink coat. But that night, back in his small RV parked behind the town library, he carved wood. Mark didn't have much, just a hot plate, a single cot, and a workbench, where he whittled away hours he didn't want to remember. That evening he pulled a discarded school chair from the shed, its leg cracked, paint flaking. He sanded it, repaired the brace beneath, painted it soft blue. On the backrest, he carved a tiny robin. It took 4 hours. He didn't tell anyone. The next morning, Mark came in earlier than usual, before sunrise, before Alana, before Maddie. He placed the chair just outside Miss Brooks's classroom door, angled toward the window. No note, no explanation. Then he went to mop the gym floor. At 8:05, Alana noticed the chair. She didn't know where it came from. But something about the carving the robin, just like the one on her sweater, made her pause. She didn't ask. She simply brought the chair inside and set it beside the reading corner. Maddie saw it. She paused mid-step. Her eyes lingered on the carving, one hand twitching at her side. But she said nothing. And she didn't sit. Still, for the first time that week, she walked into the room without prompting, and Mark, passing quietly with a mop down the far hallway, didn't look back. Elk Ridge Elementary was the kind of school where everyone noticed everything. A new bulletin board didn't stay new for long, and a child with mismatched shoes could become the subject of whispered speculation in the teacher's lounge before first bell. But even in a place that thrived on routine and observation, Maddie remained an enigma wrapped in silence. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, only with short, clipped answers. She never joined recess games. She never laughed. And most notably, she never sat down. Not during circle time, not at lunch, not even when the class practiced their winter song and every other child sat cross-legged on the polished floor. She stood always just a little apart. Miss Alana Brooks didn't push. 20 years of teaching had taught her the difference between a shy child and a silent storm. Maddie wasn't afraid of her peers. She simply didn't seem to belong anywhere her body had to rest. Alana watched the child with the gentle patience of someone who had once waited years for her own heart to soften again. Since the loss of her husband, she had learned how to hold space for grief, for growth for children who didn't yet know how to ask for help. Still, the stillness of Maddie unnerved her. On Thursday morning, as the class practiced spelling on laminated boards, Maddie stood at her usual spot by the shelf of alphabet books. Alana crouched next to her gently. "Maddie, would you like to sit here?" she asked, tapping the new soft blue chair with the robin carved in the back. Maddie's eyes followed her hand, but she didn't respond. "It's just for you," Alana said softly. "No one else will use it." Still nothing. The girl's lips parted barely, then closed again. Alana stood and smiled, even though something in her chest felt tight. "Okay. You can sit whenever you're ready." That afternoon during the lunch period, Alana found herself walking past the back entrance to the gym, where she saw Mark adjusting a stack of cones for PE. He wore his usual flannel shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cold. She stopped in the doorway. "Was it you?" she asked. He looked up, confused. "The chair." Mark hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Did she sit?" "No," Alana said quietly, but she looked at it. He turned back to the cones. "It's a start." Alana stepped a little closer, studying him. There was something about the way he moved, deliberate, restrained, like someone holding his breath even when exhaling. "Why did you make it?" Mark shrugged. Seemed like she needed something that was hers. Alana nodded slowly. She hasn't said much, but there's something behind her eyes, like she's waiting for permission to exhale. Mark wiped his hands on a rag and met her gaze. You know, Alana added her voice softer. Most people here think you're just quiet. But kids like her, they see things. And she keeps watching you." Mark didn't answer. His jaw clenched for a moment before he turned back to his task. That evening, Alana sat at her desk long after the last child had gone home. Her classroom, always warm and bright in the morning, now felt still and dim. Outside, snow had begun to fall, gently covering the school grounds in a soft hush. She pulled Maddie's enrollment form from the file drawer. The name listed under guardian wasn't a parent, just a man named Clayton Reeves, labeled as a family acquaintance. No emergency contacts, no medical history, no known allergies, just a scrawled signature and a barely legible address in the outskirts of town. She frowned. In her experience, when a 6-year-old won't sit, there's almost always a reason. And sometimes that reason is sitting in the dark, places no one wants to look. That night, Mark dreamed of Denver again, of fluorescent lights and a hollow hallway, of a tiny apartment where the smell of mold and urine clung to the walls, a teddy bear missing an eye, a case file thick with warnings no one read in time. And the worst part, a little girl who stopped trusting chairs long before she stopped trusting people. He woke up gasping, sitting upright on the cot in his RV. Sweat slicked down his back. His hands were shaking. He stood, walked barefoot to the workbench, and ran his fingers along the edge of a half-sanded piece of pine. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't need to see. He knew the shape of this grief by heart. Friday morning arrived colder than the day before. Maddie came in wearing a different coat this time. Green, but still too big. Her shoes were still mismatched. She walked into the classroom, paused at the doorway, and looked at the robin on the chair. Then, for the first time, she moved toward it. She stood beside the chair for a long moment, just staring. Alana didn't speak. No one did. Maddie slowly lowered her hand, ran her fingers along the carved backrest. Then she stepped back, folded her arms, and looked away. It wasn't a no. It wasn't a yes. It was almost. And for both Alana and Mark, watching from the hallway, that was everything. The wind shifted over Elk Ridge on Saturday, sweeping through the narrow streets, like a whisper searching for ears. In the town library's back lot, behind a line of unused recycling bins, Mark Callahan opened the door of his RV and stepped into the early morning cold. His breath puffed out in small clouds. A crow landed on the roof above, watching him with the kind of judgment only crows and children seemed capable of. Mark didn't mind. He rubbed his hands together, flicked on the propane heater inside the RV, then walked over to his workbench. The air inside was scented with cedar shavings, old varnish, and a ghost of coffee from the night before. The space wasn't much: a small fold-out stool, a cracked light bulb overhead, and piles of salvaged wood leaned against the wall like quiet sentinels. He sat. On the bench in front of him lay a second chair, smaller than the first, a school chair he'd rescued from a dumpster behind the maintenance shed. The metal legs had been rusted out, but the seat itself, solid oak, was still strong. He had been working on it in pieces all week, almost instinctively, like his hands remembered something before his mind allowed it to surface. This one would be different. Not for the classroom, not for public use. This one was only for Maddie. He sanded the surface again, finer this time. Then, using the edge of his carving knife, he etched along the backrest. A robin had already been carved there, a copy of the first, but below it, he added a line of letters. Safe things take time. He didn't know if she could read cursive yet, but maybe someday she would. The words weren't meant as instruction. They were permission. By Sunday evening, Mark had painted the entire chair a soft, faded lavender. It reminded him of spring in places he hadn't visited in years. The kind of places where people left watering cans out overnight and expected the morning to be kind. He left the chair outside his RV to dry, wrapped in a clear plastic sheet in case of snow. Then he made a cup of instant coffee, sat on the edge of his cot, and stared at it through the frosted window. He didn't think of himself as a man who made gifts, but this didn't feel like charity. It felt like a bridge. Monday came with a heavy sky. The clouds hung low, brushing the mountaintops like gray wool. Mark loaded the chair into the back of the school's maintenance cart before dawn. No one saw him. At 7:20 a.m., before even Miss Brooks arrived, he carried the chair to her classroom and placed it just outside the door, angled slightly toward the window. Not in the center, not demanding attention, just present. He said nothing to anyone. He didn't need to. At 8:07, Maddie entered the hallway alone. Her new coat was zipped high to her chin, and her small hands were tucked into the sleeves. She walked slower than usual. When she reached her classroom, she stopped. Her eyes went to the chair immediately. Not by accident. She studied it like someone recognizing a melody they couldn't name. She reached out and brushed the top rail with one finger. Then she walked into class without a word. Inside, Miss Brooks noticed the new chair immediately. She approached it gently, ran her palm over the carved back. Safe things take time. She read aloud just above a whisper. She turned to Maddie. "Is this from you?" Maddie looked away, but her shoulders relaxed just slightly. At lunch, Alana found Mark in the custodial break room sipping black coffee from a chipped thermos. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "She saw it," she said. Mark didn't look up. "Yeah, she touched it this time." He allowed a flicker of something to cross his face. Relief, hope. It passed too quickly to pin down. "I think she knows it's from you," Alana added. "I didn't sign it. You didn't need to." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the vending machine the only sound between them. "She doesn't trust chairs," Alana said, her voice soft. "That's what I think. Not just the act of sitting, the place it represents." Mark's fingers tensed around the thermos. "Yeah," he murmured. "Some chairs mean danger." Alana glanced sideways. "Did you ever work a case like hers?" Mark hesitated. Then, worse. She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he rinsed his cup in the sink and turned toward the hallway. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Let me know if she ever sits. I'd like to be wrong just once." That afternoon, Maddie didn't sit. But when Miss Brooks called for story time and the class gathered near the front carpet, Maddie did something else. She moved her chair. She dragged it across the room slowly, carefully, and placed it near the corner of the rug. Then she stood beside it, one hand resting on the armrest. She didn't sit, but she stayed. And for a little girl who hadn't stayed anywhere long, that was monumental. Mark passed by the door once before the bell rang. Through the glass panel, he saw Maddie standing beside the lavender chair. She wasn't looking at him, but somehow he felt seen anyway. He kept walking. The next morning dawned with silence. Not just the kind of silence that comes with freshly fallen snow, though Elk Ridge had certainly been blanketed overnight, but a heavier, more intentional stillness. The kind that crept into rooms nestled between breaths and made even children speak softer. Inside room 1A, Miss Alana Brooks noticed it right away. Maddie had arrived earlier than usual. Her green coat was gone, replaced with an oversized gray one, whose sleeves had been frayed at the edges. Her shoes were still mismatched. She walked into the classroom with a kind of hush about her, paused by the lavender chair for a long moment, then stepped around it and took her usual standing place by the window. But her fingers, Alana noticed, rested lightly on the backrest, not gripping. Just there, as if grounding herself. The room filled slowly with the shuffle of little boots and the chatter of children shedding winter layers. But Maddie remained quiet, watchful, present in a way that felt fragile, like breath on a window pane. At mid-morning during reading time, Alana approached her gently. She knelt beside the girl so her voice would meet Maddie at eye level, not above, not below. "Maddie," she said, "that chair is still just yours, okay? You don't ever have to use it. But I wanted you to know someone made it, because they see you." Maddie's gaze flicked toward her uncertain. Alana smiled softly. "Do you know what it says?" The girl shook her head. Alana leaned forward, almost whispering. "It says, safe things take time." Maddie blinked. Then so quietly Alana almost missed it. The little girl murmured, "Time doesn't fix everything." It wasn't the kind of phrase a 6-year-old would invent. It was too adult, too rehearsed. The kind of sentence repeated enough times by someone older until it became a shield. Alana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She nodded slowly. "No, but love does better than time." Maddie didn't reply, but her fingers pressed just a little more firmly against the chair. Later that afternoon, Alana found Mark outside the gym, adjusting the broken latch on the emergency door. The wind tugged at his collar, and he didn't turn around when he heard her approach. "She spoke to me today," Alana said. Mark looked up. Only a few words, she continued, but they were telling. He waited. She said, "Time doesn't fix everything." Mark's jaw tightened. "It doesn't. I think someone taught her that. Someone trying to make her give up." He nodded once, then returned to the latch. Alana hesitated, then added, "Mark, I'm starting to worry about who she's going home to." He stopped. I pulled her file again, she said, her voice low. "There's no parent listed, just this Clayton Reeves, guardian, but no record of family relation. No phone number that works. And the address," she looked at him, "it's in that strip of trailers off Ridge Hollow." Mark exhaled slowly. "I know the place." Alana studied him carefully. "Do you think we should report something?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he straightened, closed the door latch with finality and said, "Not yet. Not until we're sure." Her voice sharpened. "What if waiting makes it worse?" Mark turned to face her. "What if acting too soon makes it disappear?" He wasn't angry. Not exactly, but his eyes burned with something harder memory. Alana softened. "Tell me what happened." Mark shook his head. "Another time." That evening, Mark didn't return to his RV right away. Instead, he parked outside the edge of Ridge Hollow, the cluster of trailers that looked more like forgotten promises than homes. It was the kind of place the snow didn't make pretty. Rusted-out cars, one sagging porch, no lights in the windows. He didn't get out, didn't take pictures. He just watched. At exactly 6:42 p.m., a figure emerged from a trailer near the end of the row. A man mid-50s, lean in that hard-edged way that never came from gym workouts, just a life of holding too much anger in the wrong muscles. He barked something over his shoulder. A smaller figure stepped out. Maddie. Even from this distance, Mark could tell she flinched. The man yanked open the car door. Maddie climbed in. They drove away. Mark didn't follow, but he turned on the engine, scribbled down the license plate, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. The next day, the school felt different. It wasn't something anyone said out loud. But the undercurrent was there, something waiting to break the surface. At 10:15 a.m., Mark received a message on his work radio. "Front office. Miss Brooks needs you immediately." He arrived outside room 1A in less than a minute. Inside the class was gathered in the reading corner, a storybook in Miss Brooks' hand. But Maddie wasn't among them. Instead, she stood at the back of the room, trembling pale, and beside her on the floor was the lavender chair, knocked over. Mark stepped inside. Maddie Alana said gently, "Can you tell us what happened?" The girl didn't move. Mark crouched slowly, careful not to come too close. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe here." Maddie blinked rapidly. Then in a voice like crumpled paper, she whispered, "He said if I sat again, he'd make me watch." Alana froze. Her fingers tightened around the storybook. Mark inhaled sharply. In that moment, everything fell into place. The standing, the silence, the distrust of chairs. It wasn't just about fear, it was about punishment. The chair was a symbol, a place of control, of hurt. And now, finally, they had words. Alana moved, quickly took Maddie's hand, and whispered something neither Mark nor the class could hear. Then she stepped out into the hallway and pulled out her phone. At 11:03 a.m., Miss Brooks made a 911 call. At 11:26, officers arrived at Elk Ridge Elementary. And by 11:45, the lavender chair had become evidence. Sheriff Daniels arrived with 2 deputies and a notepad full of cautious authority. Elk Ridge wasn't the kind of town used to emergencies involving children. The occasional vandalism, a shoplifter from out of town, maybe a drunk argument at the tavern, but this was different. This was delicate. And delicate wasn't what small-town law enforcement did best. Mark stood beside the teacher's desk, arms folded, jaw tight. He kept his eyes on Maddie, who sat ironically voluntarily on the floor, near the reading rug, legs pulled up to her chest, the lavender chair behind her, now upright, but untouched. Miss Brooks sat beside her, one arm gently curved around Maddie's back, not restraining, just reassuring. Her presence radiated a quiet steadiness that made even the deputies speak softer than usual. Sheriff Daniels looked older than his 60 years, not from age itself, but from having seen too much of humanity's cracks up close. He nodded to Mark when he entered, but addressed Alana first. "You were the one who made the call." Alana nodded. Maddie disclosed something. Direct. About her guardian. It wasn't hypothetical. Daniels wrote without looking up. Exact words. She said, and I quote, "He said if I sat again, he'd make me watch." Daniels stopped writing. Watch what she didn't say. But Alana's voice dropped. "We believe it may be tied to domestic abuse involving her mother." One of the deputies, a younger woman named Reyes, crouched gently near Maddie. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Deputy Reyes. Would it be okay if I asked you a couple questions?" Maddie didn't speak. Her eyes flicked toward Mark for the briefest moment, just enough for Reyes to catch it. "Who's this?" Reyes asked gently. "That's Mr. Callahan," Alana said. "He works at the school. And Maddie trusts him." Reyes glanced at Daniels, who gave a tight nod. Then she turned to Mark. "You willing to stay?" Mark didn't hesitate. Yes, they took Maddie to the nurse's office, neutral, quiet, familiar. Deputy Reyes stayed with her. Daniels remained behind to speak further with Alana and Mark. "She's registered under a man named Clayton Reeves." Alana explained, retrieving the enrollment form. "He's listed as a guardian, but there's no legal documentation attached, just a name and a trailer park address." Daniels frowned. "We've had a few complaints out of Ridge Hollow, but nothing stuck. Mostly noise one suspected narcotics call. If Reeves is the same guy I'm thinking of, he's been slippery for years." Mark spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. He used to run with a group in Denver. "I've seen the name before." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "From your old work," Mark nodded. "Back when I was still with CPD, I didn't work a case on him directly, but his name came up in more than one child endangerment report. Always just out of reach, one step ahead of the system." Daniels exhaled. Of course he was. The rest of the day passed like a fog settling in the halls of Elk Ridge Elementary. Children sensed something had changed. They moved quieter, looked more often at Maddie's corner, where the lavender chair now stood empty again. No one asked. Somehow, they all knew not to. Alana canceled afternoon lessons and let the children draw with crayons instead. Every now and then she glanced at the clock, wondering where Maddie was, whether she was talking, whether someone was listening right. Mark stayed busy. He cleaned the cafeteria early, swept the back stairwell twice, wiped down all the windows in the gym that didn't need cleaning. Anything to keep his hands moving. But at 4:15 p.m., just as he was about to head out, Alana found him by the mop sink. She's with social services now, she said softly. They're not sending her back to Reeves. Mark leaned against the sink, shoulders sagging with a slow kind of relief. They're placing her in a temporary shelter in Silver Ridge. Alana added. They say she might be eligible for emergency protective status. Mark's face stayed blank, but his fingers flexed against the mop handle. She asked about you, Alana said. He looked up. Said, is the man with the chair going to be okay? Her eyes welled. Not even am I going to be okay. That's the kind of child she is. Mark turned away, blinking hard. I didn't do enough. You did more than most ever would. That night, Mark drove. He didn't plan to. Didn't pack. Just got into his truck, turned on the heater, and followed the mountain road toward Denver until the weight in his chest loosened just enough to breathe. He ended up parked outside an old municipal building that used to be his second home, Child Protective Division District 4. Through the glass, he could see the glow of overworked case files and the shuffle of people trying to keep up with the tide. He sat there for over an hour. Then he turned the engine off, rested his hands on the steering wheel, and whispered to the dark, not this time. The next morning, Mark filed a formal request with Elk Ridge's Child Welfare Department. He didn't ask to adopt Maddie. Not yet. That would come later. He asked to sponsor her transition, to be allowed visitation, help with transport, provide supplies, and advocate on her behalf during hearings. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. The case manager, a woman named Denise, studied his file. You have a record of public service, former law enforcement, clean background check, but you've never fostered before. I don't need to foster her, Mark said quietly. I just don't want her to go through this without someone in her corner. Denise leaned forward. Why this child? Mark hesitated, then answered with raw honesty. Because she was the first one who looked at me like I could still do something right. The call came just before dawn. Mark was pouring his first cup of coffee in the RV, the kind of bitter brew only a man living alone can tolerate. The propane heater ticked faintly in the corner. Outside, snow clung to the pine trees like white moss. He hadn't been expecting anyone. His cell phone lit up with a name he hadn't seen in years, Detective Ron Miller. Mark stared at it for a moment. His thumb hovered. Then he answered. Callahan, you still pick up like that? Miller chuckled on the other end. You always sounded like a man reporting a body. Mark didn't return the laugh. What do you want? Heard from a friend that you flagged a certain Clayton Reeves through Elk Ridge Social Services. Mark said nothing. You diggin' again? Mark leaned against the counter, sipped his coffee, and stared out at the forest. He's hurting a child. Yeah, Miller said, voice tightening. Same one from that case in 18. Mark's silence was answer enough. You got proof this time? She whispered it. Miller sighed. That's not proof. No. Mark agreed, but it's enough to keep me awake. 2 hours later, Mark was back at school, unlocking the gymnasium side door when the first few staff arrived. He'd barely finished salting the back stairs when Principal Connors called him into the office. Connors was a by-the-book man, military haircut, buttoned-up shirts even on Fridays, and a personality that never quite thawed, even in July. Mark, he began, not unkindly. I've had a call. Mark nodded, once waiting. Apparently you've inserted yourself into an open case involving a student. Mark didn't blink. I'm supporting her. I'm not questioning your intentions, Connors said, but there's concern from the district that maybe your history, your resignation from Denver PD, makes this more complicated than it needs to be. There it was. Mark exhaled slowly. Do you know why I left? Connors looked uncomfortable. The file said you were involved in a high-risk investigation that ended in departmental review. Mark folded his arms. A girl died, 8 years old. I knew something was wrong. I filed reports. Nobody listened. The system tripped over its own red tape and she died. Connors stared. I left because I couldn't sit in that office another day pretending I still believed in a system that lets kids like her fall through the cracks. Silence. Then Mark added, voice steady but sharp, I will not let it happen again. The principal said nothing for a long time, then almost reluctantly nodded. Just keep it quiet. Off the radar. You're not a detective anymore, Mark. Mark's eyes didn't soften. I never stopped being one. That afternoon, Mark stood outside room 1A watching through the narrow window. The lavender chair remained untouched. Maddie hadn't been back since the police visit. But the chair was still there, waiting like a promise. Miss Brooks caught sight of him and stepped into the hallway. She'll be allowed to return part-time next week, she said. Supervised one-on-one sessions to help transition. Mark nodded, absorbing that. She asked about you again, Alana added. A faint line creased his brow. What did she say? She said, did the man get in trouble for helping me? Mark swallowed. I told her Alana continued, her voice softer, now that sometimes doing the right thing means stepping into a little trouble. But it's still right. Mark looked at her for a long moment. Thanks for that. Alana offered him a smile, but it faded quickly. There's something else. She handed him an envelope. Mark opened it and found a copy of the original incident report from Denver signed by him. Dated 4 months before the child's death. This was leaked online last year, Alana said. Someone posted it on a parenting forum about systemic failures in child protection. Your signature is right there, Mark. You tried. Mark stared at the paper, throat tight. I thought you should see it, she said quietly. The truth has a way of surviving, even when the system doesn't. That night, Mark sat alone on a bench outside the town library. The sky overhead was thick with stars, scattered like broken glass across velvet. In his lap was the old report. The paper had yellowed slightly, and his handwriting in the margins was still precise, still neat. He read it all, every word. And then he folded it gently, as if handling something fragile, and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. The next day, Maddie returned to school. Not for a full day, just 1 hour. She was escorted by Denise from Child Services and held a small backpack in front of her like a shield. She didn't speak much, just nodded when spoken to, and kept her eyes low. But when she passed Mark in the hallway, her steps slowed. He didn't move, didn't speak. She looked up at him, her chin trembling, and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting me." Mark crouched to meet her gaze, voice thick. "You were never forgotten." Denise gently guided her into the classroom. Mark stood unmoving long after the door had closed. By week's end, the school was buzzing again with the familiar rhythm of winter projects and holiday crafts. But for Mark, everything had changed. Not because the case was closed, it wasn't. Reeves had disappeared before the police could serve the warrant. No one knew where he'd gone. But Maddie was safe, and that was enough for now. Still, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the past hadn't finished with him yet. But for the first time in years, he was okay with that. Because this time he wasn't running, he was facing it. Snow blanketed Elk Ridge like a hush that had settled in for the season. Icicles clung to the eaves of houses, catching light like glass teeth. Inside room 1A, construction paper snowflakes spun gently from the ceiling, a class project led by Miss Brooks, now fluttering quietly above a classroom that was no longer just a room, it had become a threshold. Maddie returned for good that week. She still didn't sit, not always. But she no longer recoiled from chairs. Sometimes she'd rest her hand on the lavender one. Sometimes she'd kneel beside it and color quietly. She even laughed once, just a small, surprised puff of sound, when another girl offered her a heart-shaped eraser. The laughter stopped Miss Brooks mid-sentence. And across the hallway, Mark, who was cleaning the trophy case, paused as if something had cracked open inside him, something he hadn't realized had been sealed shut. That Friday, Denise from social services called Alana into her office. Mark came too by request. Denise sat behind her desk, her laptop open to a case file with too many tabs. "We have a complication," she said. Alana's stomach tightened. What kind? Denise looked at Mark. "Clayton Reeves has filed a counter-petition." Mark's fingers curled into fists. He disappeared. "Yes," Denise said. But he resurfaced. "He's retained a lawyer from out of state and claims that Maddie is under his guardianship by verbal agreement with the child's mother before she vanished." "Vanished," Alana echoed. "What does that mean?" "No one's seen or spoken to Maddie's biological mother in over 6 months," Denise replied. "There's no death certificate, no proof of abandonment, just absence." Mark's voice dropped. "And while she's absent, the man who abused her daughter gets to challenge custody." Denise didn't flinch. "This is the law, Mark, not morality." They filed an emergency motion to block Reeves from immediate custody. Mark volunteered to provide a sworn statement. He spent 3 hours writing it by hand, each sentence carved like wood, careful and personal. He detailed every moment the first time he saw Maddie standing on the playground, the way she flinched when spoken to her whispered confession. The chair, the silence, the way her eyes stopped darting when she was near him. Alana wrote her own statement too, focusing on Maddie's academic and emotional growth, how she had progressed more in 2 weeks of safety than in the month prior, how she had begun humming quietly during reading time, how she asked to borrow a book about birds. The robin carved into the chair was no longer just a decoration. It had become a symbol of sanctuary, of something Maddie didn't yet have words for. The hearing was set for the following Thursday. Mark borrowed a dress shirt from Alana's neighbor, pressed it twice, and wore the one pair of slacks he owned that hadn't been stained by bleach or wax. Alana wore gray understated and carried Maddie's crayon drawings in her bag as exhibits. The courthouse in Silver Ridge was small, 3 stories of faded brick and bad coffee. Room 204 was quiet when they entered. Maddie sat beside Denise, holding a stuffed dog with one missing ear. Reeves didn't appear in person. His lawyer did, slim, polished eyes as sharp as a file. The lawyer argued guardianship procedural missteps, lack of official removal by a court order. Mark's jaw tightened with each word, but he kept still. When it was their turn, Mark spoke first. He didn't read from his statement. He didn't need to. He looked the judge in the eye and said, "I failed a little girl once. She's buried in Denver. I don't want to fail another." The courtroom fell silent. Then Alana stood. Her voice didn't waver. "She's not a file. She's not a placement. She's a 6-year-old girl who just learned how to exhale." She placed the crayon drawing of the robin on the judge's desk. She drew this. Yesterday, they were granted a preliminary custody injunction. Reeves's claim was deemed weak, too circumstantial, too conveniently timed. The judge didn't remove his rights entirely, but she assigned Mark and Alana as temporary co-guardians, pending a formal evaluation. Outside the courthouse, Alana exhaled into the cold. Her breath curled upward like smoke. Mark looked down at Maddie, who was staring at the robin, drawing clutched in her mittened hands. "Do you want to come home with us for a little while?" he asked softly. Maddie looked up at him. She didn't smile, not quite, but her voice came fragile and firm. "As long as the chair comes too." They brought her home to the small rental on the edge of town, Mark's place, where Alana had slowly begun to spend more evenings than her own. It was nothing fancy. A fireplace that crackled more in noise than heat, a single couch patched in 2 places, and a kitchen with squeaky drawers. But it was safe. And it was theirs. Mark set up Maddie's room with care. A second-hand bed with a quilt Alana's mother had sent. A bookshelf already filled with titles he didn't know, but she would. and in the corner facing the window, the lavender chair. Maddie didn't sit in it that night, but she touched it, ran her hand across the carved robin's wing, then stood beside it, watching the snow outside. Alana stood in the doorway, arms folded loosely. "She'll be okay." Mark looked at her, then at Maddie and nodded. "Yeah." Then almost reluctantly he added, "So will I." That night, Alana and Mark sat side by side on the couch, both holding mugs of tea, neither finished. Maddie had fallen asleep with her hand still touching the chair, as if anchoring herself to something real. "Do you think we'll be allowed to keep her?" Alana asked, voice soft. Mark was quiet a long time. Then he said, "She's already keeping us." The house on Maple Hollow Lane wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, an old wood stove that took forever to catch flame, and windows that rattled when the wind came through the pines. But for Maddie, it was the first place in her 6 years of life where nothing locked from the outside. No padlocks, no sliding chains, no angry hands grabbing doorknobs. Just doors. Doors that opened. Doors that stayed open. And one room that was entirely hers. Mark had cleared out the spare bedroom within a day of the judge's ruling. He took down the mounted fishing rods, boxed up his old paperbacks, and laid a braided rug over the creaking floorboards. Alana brought over soft sheets, painted a small rainbow on one wall, and added a tiny bookshelf from her classroom. But it was Maddie who chose where the chair would go. The lavender chair was no longer a school object. It wasn't a symbol anymore. It was hers. She placed it in the corner beside the window that looked out onto a bend of the woods where deer sometimes wandered near dusk. And every morning before school, she would sit beside it, still not on it, but near enough that her shoulder brushed the carved robin's wing as she read or watched the snow. Neither Alana nor Mark ever asked why she wouldn't sit yet. They just let her be near it, as long as she needed. One night after Mark had finished repairing a loose kitchen cabinet, he walked into Maddie's room and saw her standing beside the chair, barefoot, looking up at the rainbow on the wall. She didn't notice him at first. When she did, she didn't flinch. "I don't remember my real house," she said suddenly without turning. "Not really. Just that it had no windows in the back, and Mama used to whisper stories so he wouldn't hear." Mark felt something catch in his throat. "I used to think stories were just made-up things," Maddie went on, but hers felt like hiding places, like blankets for the air. Mark didn't speak. He just stepped inside, crouched beside the chair, and ran his hand once over the robin. "She'd like this one," Maddie said quietly. Mark looked at her. "Would she?" She nodded. She liked birds. She said they flew in both directions at once, up and forward. He almost smiled. "That's a good thing to like. Do you think she's still flying?" Mark blinked once hard, then nodded. "I think she's flying wherever you are." Maddie didn't cry. She just sat down on the floor beside the chair knees, tucked up, chin on her arms, and Mark sat beside her. Not to talk, not to solve, just to stay. By the second week of co-guardianship, a new rhythm had formed. Alana took the morning shift, brushing Maddie's hair, packing lunches with small notes tucked between napkins. Mark handled evenings, checking homework, playing old jazz records on the turntable, teaching Maddie how to sand wood without splinters. Sometimes all 3 of them would sit around the fireplace, reading different books in the same room. No one spoke. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. It was earned. One Tuesday, Maddie came home from school with a folded flyer in her backpack. Winter Showcase First Grade Performance, Family Night. She handed it to Mark without a word. He read it twice, then looked at her. "Do you want to go?" Maddie shrugged. "I guess." "You don't have to," he said. "Only if you want to." Maddie hesitated, then whispered, Will there be chairs? Mark smiled gently. We'll bring yours. That weekend, Mark cleared space in the living room and set up a little stage, just a few throw pillows on the floor and a flashlight taped to the ceiling fan as a makeshift spotlight. Practice run, he said. No audience, just us. And this guy. He pointed at the lavender chair now centered in the room. Maddie giggled the first real giggle either of them had heard in days. She stepped onto the stage and held up her cue cards. Welcome to the Elk Ridge First Grade Winter Showcase, she announced in a sing-song voice. Mark and Alana clapped loudly from the couch, and now she continued a poem about snowflakes. She cleared her throat, then recited, "Snowflakes fall and whisper down, landing soft without a sound. Each one different, each one light, like tiny stars that lost their night." When she finished, there was silence for a beat. Then, thunderous applause from two people who meant it with their whole hearts. Maddie beamed, and as she stepped off her stage, she did something she hadn't done before. She sat down, right into the lavender chair, like it had been waiting for her all along. Alana's eyes filled. Mark blinked hard and looked away, but not before Maddie noticed. She looked at him and whispered, "You okay?" Mark nodded. Better than okay. That night, when the house had gone quiet, and Maddie was asleep under her rainbow. Mark stood in the hallway staring at her door. He didn't knock, just watched. Alana came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You built more than a chair, you know." "I didn't build her." "No," she said softly, "but you held the space for her to build herself." They stood that way for a long time, two people who had once built walls, now learning to build a life. Not perfect, but open, like a house with no locked doors. The first real snow of December came suddenly, as if the clouds had simply given in overnight. By morning, Elk Ridge was hushed beneath a blanket of white. The town transformed into something softer, slower, more forgiving. The trees were trimmed with frost. Porch railings bowed under delicate curves of ice. And from the window of her bedroom, Maddie watched the world turn quiet. She didn't speak, but her breath formed a tiny circle of fog on the cold glass, and the corners of her mouth curled ever so slightly. In the hallway, Mark listened to the stillness. He could hear the water heater ticking, the distant hum of Alana in the kitchen, pouring cereal into 2 bowls. But more than that, he could feel something different. It wasn't just the snow. It was the absence of fear. After breakfast, Alana bundled Maddie into her oversized coat, the one with the blue buttons and fleece lining. "We're going out there," Maddie asked, peering out the window as if the snow were a rumor. Alana smiled. "Yes, we are." Even the chair, "No," Mark said from the doorway, already pulling on gloves. "Chairs stay warm. But we'll take a sled instead." Maddie lit up visibly like someone had flipped a switch inside her. The backyard behind Mark's house sloped gently downward into a wide clearing ringed by pines. It wasn't much, but it was just enough. The snow had fallen undisturbed. No footprints, no marks. Maddie hesitated at the top of the hill. "It's okay," Mark said, holding the rope of the plastic sled. "You don't have to." She turned and looked up at him. Then slowly, deliberately, she stepped onto the sled, plopped down, and whispered, "Let's go." Mark gave a single push. The sled glided. Not fast, not wild, just enough. Maddie's laugh followed behind her like a song she hadn't sung in years. Alana stood at the bottom, arms out clapping. 10 out of 10, Maddie leapt off brushed snow from her coat and looked up the hill. Again, Mark was already climbing. They stayed outside for nearly an hour, until cheeks were pink and fingers stiff inside mittens. Maddie built half a snowman, before deciding she liked it better, broken in pieces. Alana helped her shape snowballs and throw them gently at the pine trees. And when they finally went inside, They peeled off their winter layers in a pile near the door, like a family used to making space for one another. Maddie settled into her lavender chair beside the fireplace without prompting, a towel across her lap, cocoa in both hands. Her legs swung freely beneath her, relaxed, unguarded. "You know," she said suddenly, "I think snow is like forgiveness." Mark turned from the fireplace. "How's that?" "It makes everything quiet and kind, even the stuff that was ugly before." Alana looked at her for a long, quiet second, then walked over and kissed the top of her head. "You're exactly right." That evening, while Maddie was drawing birds in her notebook, Mark stood at the kitchen counter cutting vegetables for stew. Alana leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching him. "She seems freer," she said. "She is," he replied. "She hasn't flinched all day." Alana tilted her head. "Neither have you." He paused, knife halfway through a carrot. Then he exhaled and leaned against the counter. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "Not really. I know how to fix a broken chair, patch drywall, clean up a mess. But raising a child, being someone she needs," Alana stepped forward, resting her hand on his. "That's what makes you the right person. You're not trying to be perfect. You're showing up every single day." Mark looked down at their hands. Her fingers were smaller, but they held firm, grounded. "When she looks at you," Alana said softly, "she doesn't see a janitor or an ex-cop. She sees home." That night, Maddie insisted on reading her poem aloud again, the snowflake one she'd practiced for the winter showcase. She stood in the living room, flashlight in hand, lavender chair behind her, like a stage prop. Alana and Mark sat on the couch, clapping before she even began. Maddie cleared her throat dramatically. Snowflakes fall and whisper down, landing soft, without a sound. Halfway through, she paused and looked at Mark. "Will you read the last line with me?" He looked surprised. "Me," she nodded. He stood, slowly walked to her side. She pointed to the last line with her finger. Together, they said, "Like tiny stars that lost their night." Silence followed, deep, warm, reverent. Then Alana clapped, wiping at her eyes. "Bravo." Maddie grinned and bowed. Mark looked at her. "You want me to build a stage for the real performance next week? Maybe just bring the chair," Maddie said. "That's enough magic." Later that night, after Maddie had fallen asleep, curled up with her bird notebook, Mark and Alana sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the snow glow blue under the moon. "She's becoming herself," Alana whispered. Mark nodded. "It's like watching a door unlock one hinge at a time." Alana leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know, the night I lost my husband, I thought I'd never feel this again. This kind of warmth." Mark looked out over the snow. "I stopped believing I could protect anything, that I deserved to." She turned to him. "Do you believe it now?" He didn't answer right away. Then he looked back at the house at the window, where Maddie's nightlight glowed like a firefly. "Yes," he said, "finally. Because she lets me try." The Elk Ridge Elementary Winter Showcase was never extravagant. Folding chairs were set in uneven rows, hot cider was served in foam cups, and the curtain on the multi-purpose room stage stuck halfway unless someone gave it a sharp tug. But this year, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the janitor had spent his weekend repainting the floorboards backstage, or the way Miss Brooks, usually reserved, wore a cardinal red scarf and hummed while pinning name tags on the performers. Or maybe it was the lavender chair placed deliberately at stage right, where the children usually waited their turn. Maddie stood beside it, holding her crayon-colored cue cards. She wasn't nervous, at least not in the way other kids were. No bouncing knees, no whispered rehearsals. She was calm, as if she understood something the room didn't. Mark stood at the back of the auditorium near the exit, just in case she needed him. He wore his old Denver PD jacket not out of nostalgia, but because Maddie had once said it made him look strong like a mountain. Alana sat in the third-row aisle seat, clutching a camera she barely remembered how to use. The show began with jingles and poems. The kindergartners wore snowflake hats that kept sliding down their foreheads. A boy in first grade forgot the words to Jingle Bells and started improvising lyrics about hot dogs. The audience roared with laughter. Then came the poetry section. Miss Brooks approached the mic, smiling gently. And now our final poem tonight will be read by Maddie Reeves. There was a brief pause in the crowd. A few heads turned. The name was familiar. Whispers fluttered like moths. Mark tensed near the door. Then Maddie walked out. No one prompted her. No one guided her. She stepped calmly into the center of the stage, holding her cue cards in both hands. Behind her, the lavender chair waited silent, steady hers. She looked out over the audience. Her eyes found Mark first, then Alana. Then she began. Snowflakes fall and whisper down, landing soft without a sound. Each one different, each one light, like tiny stars that lost their night. She paused her breath, steady. Then, without a word, she turned around, walked to the lavender chair, and sat. A moment of perfect stillness swept the room. Not shock, not confusion, but reverence. It wasn't just a chair anymore. It was a declaration. Mark felt his throat tighten. Alana covered her mouth with both hands, tears running freely now. Even the principal standing off stage lowered his clipboard. The applause started softly from a teacher in the back, then from a student's parent, then grew until the entire room rose to its feet. Maddie didn't bow. She didn't wave. She just sat in the chair, calm and upright, like a girl who had claimed something sacred. Like a girl who had rewritten her own story. Backstage, Mark met her as she stepped down the wooden stairs. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her forehead to his coat. "You were amazing," he said hoarsely. She looked up. "I wanted to sit. I didn't know until I was up there, but I wanted to." "You didn't have to," he whispered. "I know," she said. But it was time. The next morning, snow still clung to the town, though the sun had broken through, turning the icicles into slow, glistening tears. At home, the lavender chair sat in its usual spot near the window. Maddie placed a folded sheet of paper on the seat. Mark glanced at it but didn't touch. "What's that?" "It's for the next kid," she said, "in case someone else needs to borrow it someday." He smiled. "You're giving it away." "No," she said, "but I can share it." Alana walked in carrying mugs of cocoa. "What did you write?" Maddie handed the note to her. Inside, in neat, careful letters, it read, "This chair is for sitting when you're ready. Not when they say. Only when you decide. And when you do, it means you're safe." I know, because I tried. That night, the three of them sat in the living room with no plans and no television. Just music on the old record player and the kind of silence that comes after something beautiful has been spoken aloud. Mark glanced at Alana, then at Maddie, who was curled up in her chair with a sketch pad. "Do you think she remembers the girl she used to be?" he asked softly. Alana looked at him. "She'll never forget. But she's building someone new, right on top of the ashes." Mark nodded, eyes lingering on the lavender chair. "And she's teaching us how." Later that evening, after Maddie had gone to bed, Mark stepped out onto the porch. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The stars were bright, quiet things overhead. Alana joined him a moment later, wrapped in his coat. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that maybe we weren't meant to fix her?" Mark looked at her. "Then what were we meant to do?" She leaned into him. Just be the place she could learn to fix herself. They stood there together, hands intertwined, no more words needed. Inside, beside a window lined with frost, The lavender chair sat empty, but not unused. It had done its job. And now it waited for the next quiet miracle. Spring crept slowly into Elk Ridge that year, like someone testing the doorknob before entering. Snowbanks melted with patience. The first green blades broke through patches of mud. Robins returned not in flocks, but as scouts, red-chested and curious. And Maddie had begun to sing, not loudly, not with abandon, but sometimes while coloring by the window or helping Alana water the garden, she would hum. Small melodies, fragments of lullabies she barely remembered or maybe invented. Mark said nothing when he heard her. He just listened, grateful. The lavender chair now lived in the heart of the living room. It had migrated slowly from the corner of Maddie's room to the main space between the fireplace and the bookshelf. She sat in it often, now curled up with a book, legs dangling over one arm sometimes, asleep with a pencil still tucked behind her ear. It no longer held tension. It held presence. It was no longer a statement. It was home. Mark had built a new chair, too. Not a replacement, an addition. It was smaller, rougher around the edges. He hadn't carved a robin this time. He let Maddie paint the backrest herself. She chose yellow, then added a crooked heart in purple. "This one's for when we have visitors," she said. "But only nice ones." Mark chuckled. Fair rule. Alana had officially moved in by then, though no one had made a grand announcement. Her toothbrush simply never left. Her coat lived on the hook beside Mark's. She'd taken over the side of the bed that didn't creak as loudly. Love had arrived quietly in gestures, not declarations. She made the coffee the way Mark liked. He washed her car before snowstorms. Maddie started calling them my grown-ups. No one corrected her. In late May, the school year neared its end. Elk Ridge Elementary held a small outdoor celebration under the maple trees. There were picnic tables, face-painting lemonade in plastic cups, and in one corner of the field, a makeshift Hall of Heroes, where students displayed essays about people who changed their lives. Maddie's paper was pinned with a thumbtack, scrawled in purple marker. "My hero is the man who gave me a chair, but didn't make me sit. He waited until I was ready, and that's how I knew he was safe." Beneath the sentence, she'd drawn 3 stick figures, one tall man, one woman with curly hair, and a little girl sitting in a chair with stars around it. Mark stood staring at the paper for a long time, sunglasses hiding the tears. Alana came to his side and slipped her hand into his. She could have picked anyone. "She picked right," he said softly. 2 days later, Mark received a letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, embossed with the seal of the Elk County Family Court. He opened it slowly, like it might break. Final custody granted. Joint adoption confirmed. Mark Callahan and Alana Brooks, legal guardians of Maddie Reeves. Now Maddie Callahan Brooks. He read it 3 times. Then sat down on the porch step and laughed, a short, stunned sound. Then he cried. When he handed the letter to Alana, she read it aloud to Maddie in the kitchen. Maddie listened carefully. "So, that means I'm yours?" Alana knelt. "It means you were ours long before this letter. Now the world knows it too." Maddie grinned. "Can I still call you my grown-ups?" "You'd better," Mark said from the doorway, voice thick. That night, they had pancakes for dinner, Maddie's idea. She sprinkled hers with blueberries in the shape of tiny birds. To family, Alana toasted with a glass of orange juice. To chairs, Maddie added. Mark raised his cup. To second chances. Summer came with late sunsets and the smell of cut grass. Maddie ran barefoot through the backyard, hair wild, laughter even wilder. She climbed trees, learned how to fish, fell in love with old country songs, and told Mark he needed to grow a mustache like the man on the album cover. She built a birdhouse with him one Saturday, then painted the roof sky blue and named it Mama's Nest. "I don't know if she's gone," Maddie said one evening unprompted, "but I don't feel scared anymore." Mark looked at her. "That's what healing feels like." Maddie nodded. "It feels like sitting down without looking over your shoulder." In the fall, she started second grade. Alana still taught first just down the hall. Mark had taken on extra hours, no longer just janitor, but unofficial fixer of everything. The kids called him Mr. Mark. Even the principal smiled when he passed. Maddie thrived, not in showy ways. She didn't become the loudest or the best reader or the first to raise her hand, but she became whole. The teachers noticed. So did the children. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the day he first saw her standing alone on the playground, Mark found Maddie in the backyard. She was sitting in the lavender chair, which she had dragged out beneath the tree. A notebook rested on her lap. She was writing. "What's that?" he asked. "A letter," she said. To who she looked up. To the girl I used to be. Mark blinked. "What are you telling her?" he asked softly. Maddie smiled. That it's okay now. That she did her best. That she didn't lose. Mark sat down beside her in the grass. She didn't. She found her chair. "No," Maddie said, eyes bright. She made it hers. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass, Mark looked at the child beside him, not broken, not lost, not waiting, just home. And beside her, the chair she never touched, now fully hers, worn smooth by love, etched with hope, and ready always for the next small miracle. Maybe we don't all get second chances, but sometimes we get to be someone else's. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. It always warms our hearts to see how far these quiet miracles can travel. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories of healing, of love, of the quiet strength we carry, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you truly for spending this time here. Until next time, take care of your heart, and never underestimate the power of a chair or a hand held out in kindness.